As we begin Project 2, our first video editing exercise, it seems very appropriate that we should also discuss principles of editing. Now, editing has two main functions, two main purposes, we might say. Of course, number one, we need to place our shots into a series. We need to put them in a sequence, and I like to use that word meaningful sequence. Right? Things aren't just laid out haphazardly, but every choice about where everything is placed has been thought through. It's a very meaningful sequence. Okay, we do that for number two to tell a story with clarity, so the message is clear and it has impact. So it's not boring, it is something that engages our audience. Okay, so then we have four specific editing functions: combine, condense, correct, and build. Now, the first of these functions, combine, this is that simplest form of editing. It is the hooking pieces together, sort of connecting the dots. It is putting our shots in order. Okay, the story is all laid out. Though we don't have transitions, we don't have special effects, we don't have all these details, the text and things probably isn't in there. It's what we call cuts only, right? We've just laid the story out. Then we have condense. So once we've laid it out, we need to start cutting things. And I would say, generally speaking, we need to cut a lot more probably than we might initially think. Student projects, but not only student projects, even someone who is a seasoned veteran, their projects often can be left too long. It can be really easy to fall in love with your own work. We see things a certain way. We had a certain idea. We made this thing. We think it's funny. We think it's necessary. But that doesn't mean that's the way the audience sees it. So we need to really train ourselves to condense, to take things out that we don't need. Here's an example of something I've seen a lot from student projects. Let's say we have a character and it's the middle of the winter and the character needs to get in their car and drive to another location. Well, I've seen many videos where that character will go over to the door, they'll put on their boots, their coat, their scarf, their hat, their gloves. They'll walk out the door, they'll walk to the car, they'll get in the car, put on the seatbelt, turn on the car, turn on the radio, put the car into gear, drive. We'll see them driving for a while. They'll finally get to the place, stop the car, get out of the car, and then walk up to the door of the location. Well, most of that information, pretty much all of that information, is just things we don't even need. I mean, if we wanted to communicate that it was cold, we might see somebody, putting on a hat, and then we might just cut to the location and they're already there. Or maybe they put on their hat, maybe then we cut to a shot and they're driving for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then we cut to another shot where they're just at the other location. So there's lots and lots of information that we do not need. We do not need the mundane parts of life. We want to communicate in the most efficient manner possible. Third, correct. So correcting is a difficult and time-consuming part of editing. It's very frustrating oftentimes, and the result it yields is, if it is then usable, it is only just that. It's rarely the case that it would ever be as good, really anywhere as good, as just if the mistake had not been made. Now, certainly mistakes do happen. But again, this brings us back to why pre-production is so important. The more we plan, the less likely we are to make these mistakes that just can't really be fixed well during post-production, right? So we always want to get it right in production rather than try to fix it in post. Then finally, number 4 is build. So building is the most satisfying phase of editing. It is. The production, it gives you the bricks and mortar. It gives you the pieces. And then it is this element here. I mean, once it's been laid out, now there are so many detailed, creative choices that must be made that really give the piece its clarity and impact. Now, if you are a very detail-oriented person, you're a creative mind, and you can sit in front of the computer for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, then editing is probably for you. I find overall that this building part of editing it generally seems to be the most, or at least one of the most enjoyable parts of this whole media production process for students. That's what I generally see and hear from them. So I expect and I hope that you're really going to enjoy this element of the course. I also want to mention on building, when you're at this level of the editing, the editor gets to make a lot of these choices, but certainly there is the script. There is the director who may also just be sitting right there and making the choices along with the editor or has the final say. It very well, though, could be that the director and editor are the same person. Think about something like documentary, though. Documentary is an interesting form in that while going into the production, you already have a lot of ideas and a lot of research about what the story you're trying to build. But a lot of things happen during those interviews of a documentary, and oftentimes a lot of the story elements aren't really figured out and constructed until the editing. So there is so much that editors do in different types of productions about what they add to the overall story. It's not just someone who's pressing buttons and putting things, the way the script outlines them. There's far more to it than that. Now, we have the 4 functions. Now we've got the 2 stages of editing. So this is just sort of 2 umbrellas, like those 4 functions we just talked about would fit under these 2 stages. So we have the rough cut, which is basically the combining part. So we have the basic assembly of shots. It's where we're going to have the visual continuity, so everything is basically lined up. But we don't have in our special effects, and we haven't really made the detailed edits. It's the clarity is starting to get there, but we really haven't put all the impact into it. So, with rough cut, it would be very common if I asked a student, like, how's that project coming along? They say, well, I've got a rough cut. Well, then I know where they're at. They have everything laid out, it's assembled, but there's still a lot of detailed editing to be done. Now, that detailed editing phase, that's what we call the final cut. That's where the fine-tuning happens. All right, aesthetic principles of continuity editing. This is where we get to sort of the meat and potatoes. This is the part I think if you forget all the functions, even though you have to know some of that basically we have the basic ideas. If we're going to put stuff together, we're going to make detailed edits. But what are those detailed edits? Well, here is a list of a lot of the things you can do to really add impact to your story. Okay, we call this idea is called continuity editing. So it's just creating a seamless transition from one detail to the next, even though a lot of information, as I mentioned before in the condensing spiel, a lot of things are omitted. Okay, we want to maintain consistent, continuous action, keep the detail consistent, but we're also going to add that clarity and impact. So the principles of continuity editing start here. Cutting on action. And now for each of these principles, there's also a companion document in this week's module that has examples of each of these different principles. And so I will do my best to describe them during this video, but you then need to go and watch these examples. So number 1, cutting on action. An example of this comes from Kill Bill, and it's a fight scene. So cutting on the action is essentially that the motion, the action in shot A seamlessly transitions into the next shot, shot B. So if someone's fist is flying forward in shot A, in shot B, that fist, the position of the fist would start at where the other shot stopped, and the action would then continue. So when there's 2 shots linked together, but the action just flows seamlessly right through those 2 shots, but that could be 5 shots or 6 shots or 10 shots that are all linked together, and the action from each shot matches perfectly. Next we have match cuts. I've put 2 examples of match cuts into the document. There's one from Breaking Bad, and then probably about the most famous match cut of all time, which is from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Okay, it's a cut from one shot to another where 2 shots are matched by action or subject and subject matter. And so it may be something visual, as in a shape. It might be a sound. It might be some sort of motion in one shot then connects to the other. What you're going to see in the Breaking Bad clip is you're going to see these pipes that are leaking and dripping, and you hear the sound of the dripping pipes. And then it cuts to a tea bag that's dripping the tea down into like a coffee mug. And those things are matched by a visual drip and by the sound of the drip. It's a really cool transition. And then the 2001: A Space Odyssey, the very famous one, is where there is meant to be this sort of passage of, I don't know, I think the idea would be millions of years, where we have these sort of ape-like creatures, and if you've ever seen this, or if you do see it, the idea is these creatures are beginning to evolve. There's these sort of alien interventions, and then there's this point to where the one creature, he has this bone in his hand. He throws this bone up in the air, and as this bone is flying through the air, it then cuts to a scene of a similar shaped structure of the spaceship. And so these millions of years are jumped over from this bone cutting to the spaceship. Okay, again, probably the most famous match cut. Then jump cuts. A jump cut can appear in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it works really well. It's something very useful. And other times it will look like a mistake. So you have to just be careful with jump cuts. So a jump cut is a cut in editing in which 2 sequential shots of the same subject are taken from camera positions that vary only slightly, if at all. So I think an easy way, I didn't actually put this example in, but I imagine you can picture this. It happens a lot with YouTubers and vlogs. You'll have just like a talking head on screen, and what they've done is they've just cut out a bunch of dead space in between things that they've said. And so you will see the person's head or face, kind of pop. You'll know that just a chunk of information was taken out, but it's exactly the same shot. Okay, and that is a stylistic thing that's used a lot now, especially, like I say, in YouTubers. However, there are other times when that can just feel completely wrong. Just in general storytelling and cinematic type sequences, it can just feel really wrong when you can notice it, because it will seem like this jump in the cut. That's why they call it a jump cut. The cut feels like it jumps, and it's not part of the style. It is something that takes you out of the production. What should have happened to prevent those sort of mistakes usually is that the camera needed to either be closer or further away, and the angle needed to be changed. So usually between 2 shots, we don't have 2 medium shots in a row of the same character. We would have maybe a medium shot that cuts to a close-up, or a close-up that cuts back to a knee shot. But we would rarely have the same shot on the character with a cut in it, because we end up with this jump cut. It's not to say that it would never happen, but it's something we watch very closely. So, and 2, it's not only necessarily the camera going in or out, but the camera needs to often change the angle a little bit. Because if the angle doesn't change, it can also look really weird if the shot just jumps straight forward or straight back. Now, the example I've put on here for this one actually comes from my favorite director, Wes Anderson, one of his movies, The Royal Tenenbaums. And in this scene, we will see the transformation of a character as he cuts his hair and trims his beard. And it's set to music, but the images are a series of jump cuts. And I think it's a very effective use. It's a really great way to use it in a cinematic setting. Then we have the cutaway. Cutaway is interruption of a continuously filmed action by inserting a view of something else. So there's the what is happening, and then all of a sudden there's a shot of something else. The camera turns to capture something that's not, directly what we were just looking at. Now, the video I have put on here for this it does such a great job of explaining some different ways that this can function that I won't talk too much more about it. But really watch this video because it gives you some different ideas about how you can use the cutaway and really good examples on that. Now, I also want to insert this idea in here of the mental map. Now, this is something that has already been discussed, but I want to reemphasize it. This was discussed in the pre-production documents lecture when talking about the 180-degree rule. So the viewer automatically tries to make sense of where things are and in what direction they are moving on and off screen. So anytime someone's watching a scene, even if they're not thinking about it, our mind subconsciously has placed these things in a certain way. We understand that this character is on the left or this character is on the right, or that car is moving from left to right. Once you establish that mental map, you really, really need to adhere to it. Because if all of a sudden something's going in a different direction or people aren't where we thought they were supposed to be, it's going to be very confusing to the viewer. And generally speaking, we are trying to create clarity. So we want to make sure we keep that mental map intact. Now, there's always that idea of the psychological thriller and things are supposed to be confusing. Well, that's really good to know then the 180-degree rule, or to understand the mental map, because you may actually want to purposefully disorient that map. Okay, so the more you understand the basic rule and guideline, the better you can, just throw that out to create different effects for different genres or different stories. Okay, so again, just want to mention the 180-degree rule. Remember, the camera should not cross over the line of sight, not unless we see that the line of sight has changed. Then you can cross over, or if we actually see the camera physically move and the shot shows a crossing of the line, then you can switch over. All right, so here's a couple of really cool ideas that now get into even more complex areas of editing. So complexity editing, adding in pace and rhythm to the edit. Okay, so pace and rhythm, I really like to think of these being connected to like music. So if you study music at all, pace and rhythm, I think these will fit into those categories really well. So pace is determined by several different things. But pacing determined by the movement of the subject. So if there are things, the person is moving in the camera. If the person is running, that right there is going to increase the pace. If the camera is it's tracking along, that will increase the pace. Now, if I have someone running and it's just one shot, okay, it might be fast because they're running, but if I cut that into 5 different shorter shots and showed those in the same duration of maybe just one longer shot, that also would increase the pace. So instead of just showing a shot of someone running, I might show a long shot of them running, then cut to a close-up of their feet, then a close-up of their face, then a close-up of their hands, and then back to a medium shot. So linking all of those shorter shots together again will increase the pace. And so we can also think of pace as the tempo. So maybe think of it, it's like the musical beat. Now, the tempo, we don't always want the tempo to just be just one tempo. Maybe just pedal to the floor, just going fast. There are times where things need to move fast. But generally speaking, too, we want to let off of the gas and let the audience get a little bit of breather and then maybe jump back on the gas. You will notice some things like that, I believe, from this example that I put on here, which will be It's a chase scene from Casino Royale, so James Bond movie. And this one has lots of very intense, high-paced stuff, but it also has these moments of letting up to breathe. So really pay attention to the tempo, the pace of that edit. Okay, so the last note there, the shorter the duration of each shot typically increases the intensity of the sequence. And modern action sequences exploit this idea a lot, right? Chase scenes, fight scenes, these things, instead of just having, a few shots, there will be so many shots, just tiny short little shots linked together that really increase the intensity. Then we have rhythm. So rhythm is going to indicate sort of a pattern to the edit. So you can, again, imagine something musical, so the beat, but not just the beat, but the pattern. Now, rhythmic edits may or may not sync with a musical soundtrack. There are a lot of different ways that this may occur. Certainly in music videos, this would be very common. I didn't post any music videos because I think this would be about the most common. You can probably imagine it, that as the music is going along and on the beat, the image is changing oftentimes on the beat of the music. That certainly would be a rhythmic edit. The example I've chosen it's a compilation of edits from the movie Requiem for a Dream. Now this is a very dark movie. If you're not familiar with it, it goes into drug abuse, prescription drug abuse. It's actually, I believe, a very, very difficult movie to watch. But I grabbed this one from YouTube where someone had taken all of these different rhythmic edits and just compiled them for us to see. And what they are is every time that one of the characters is engaging with drugs, whether it be prescription drugs or just some sort of illegal drug, there is a short little section of shots that are played very rhythmically. And each of those shots, these very short shots, show something within the process of taking the drugs. And so you can see all of those. And I think that's a really interesting way to put these rhythmic patterns into a story, especially something that is cinematic. Okay, now switching gears a bit here within editing, we have transitions. So we're just talking about the connection of two shots. Shot A connects to shot B. That's going to happen over and over and over. A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D, and it just goes on and on. What we need to know is when to use the different types of transitions. Now, in the editing software, there are so many different built-in transitions that you can easily drag and drop right onto your project. The thing about those is that most of those you don't ever need and you should stay far, far, far away from. For sure, the most common edit is a straight cut. That means there is no transition other than shot A immediately cuts to shot B. So as you are watching things, start to take notice of how shots transition from one to the next. Shots usually, the transition will be something like cutting on the action, or maybe it's a match cut, but all of those things are straight cuts. The shot straight cuts, there's not some fancy way as far as things are dissolving or wiping or pond ripples or, anything bizarre like that. Just a straight cut from one to the next is the most common. And so if you are in doubt, go with that, right? That is, most of the time, that is your best choice. Now, the second, probably most common transition is going to be a cross dissolve. Or maybe we say a fade in or fade out. Certainly it'd be common for a production to start by fading in or also then to fade out at the end. But a cross dissolve, this is where one shot starts to fade out as the next shot fades in. And you got to be really, really careful with cross dissolves. Now, they are something that is fairly common, but they communicate something very specific, and that is a passage of time. So the clip that I put on here for this is from National Lampoon's Vacation. And you'll very clearly see, as Clark Griswold, that character he's wrecked the car out in the desert, and if you had seen the earlier part of the scene, you would see that he was interacting with this very beautiful woman who's passing him and his family while the family's all asleep in the car, and then he gets distracted. A variety of things happen, and then he runs out into the desert. But now he needs to find a gas station. So as he's making this trip to find gas, right, we see this series of cross dissolves, and so we understand that he's been out there for a long time. Now, a downfall I see is students oftentimes tend to drop these cross dissolves on just like everything, but really you just almost never need them. I've seen it in chase scenes, but that makes no sense, right? It should be cutting on the action, A to B to C, and it's going fast, and people are running. But for some reason, students will drop cross dissolves on there, right? And then it's just like there's just this crazy, instead of things being immediate and it's really fast, it's like, well, wait, what just happened? Was there a 10-minute break? Did we have a 2-hour break? Right? It really messes up the flow. So be very, very careful with anything other than a straight cut. Certainly a cross dissolve has its place. Just know what it is. Now, when we get into more bizarre type wipes, specialty type things, or transitions, I should say, like a wipe, which George Lucas is known for, those have their special place, and you need to be very, very careful with them. I mean, there is just the rare occasion to bring it in. Now, I also say they might be a stylistic element, and that's what they are now in Star Wars. Okay, so George Lucas started with that back on Episode 4, back in the day, so A New Hope. He has all these wipes, and there's the wipes that go up and down and from side to side, and they're diagonal, and there's the diamond wipes and the clock wipes and all sorts of things. And when should you use those? Well, if you're making Star Wars, you should use those. If you're trying to parody Star Wars or something George Lucas, you should use those. And other than that, I would stay far, far away, right? They just take your work and make it look really cheesy, really unprofessional very quickly unless it has a really specific purpose. Okay? So what we want to do is to use the transition that's most appropriate to effectively tell the story that we are trying to tell. Then we have the montage. So a montage is a series of short shots edited into a sequence to condense space, time, and information. It's when you need to get from A to Z very quickly. So I have just included a clip from, well, it's probably the most famous montage in all of cinema, and it's the one from the first Rocky movie. So Rocky, he needs to get strong very fast. He needs to get trained very fast. Well, this movie's, it's probably only like 90 minutes. We don't want to see all that. How can we get him really strong and prepared? Well, we need a montage. So montages, typically things that identify it is you're going to have a music selection in the background, some upbeat driving music, and then we're going to see a succession of images where something is advancing. So in the case of Rocky, he's getting stronger, his skills and technique are getting better. And then also it can be really common to fade out a montage. All right, so make sure you check out the Rocky sequence. All right, so that's our notes on the principles of editing.